Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Covenant Cast. I'm Zach.
And I'm Steven.
And I'm Jonathan.
And today we're talking about tabletop gaming peripherals. All right, at the end of each episode, we ask a question to the listeners, and you guys are great enough to put your comments below and answer it. So we like to read some of those at the start of the episode. And
it's like a continuum thing.
It's like a cyclical thing. So last week we asked, what would you like to see change about the state of tabletop over the next 5 or 10 years? And we got some really great answers, so I'll send it over to Steven to kick this off.
Well, let's start with Metodi Nikolaev.
Nice job.
Thank you.
I would have.
Well, you can do a nice job if you don't know the right answer. So, question: what changes would you like to see the state of tabletop? The answer is: while I've been invested in the board games hobby heavily only since 2013, so a relative newcomer, I suppose, I do feel that there's low chance for me to be genuinely surprised by a new game. Usually, all revolve around the same elements: cards, dice, figures, terrain. And in terms of gameplay, most can be narrowed down to certain types: worker placement, competitive card game, dungeon crawler. While I do appreciate new and clean designs, both in terms of gameplay and art, I do feel it's hard for new games currently to move away from the borders above. Something that got me excited, although it was a few years ago, was the idea of merging physical and digital space together. There were some games that wanted to use physical miniatures and import them in digital space with their unique moves/properties, kind of like what we did with that old Pokemon N64 game.
Yeah.
Kind of.
I think I actually saw the game that he may be referring to at Gen Con one year. It looked neat.
This sparked my imagination. Imagine a place where you keep those high-valued minis in a briefcase, and each costs a lot of money. You come back from work, boot up your PC/laptop, log in, put the minis on their designated grid, and jump into VR battles. Unfortunately, those games didn't go anywhere as far as I know. This would probably be the future for the medium, or at least the direction I want it to go, instead of 30 more years of dice, cards, and PNP. Is it a tabletop game, if that's the case?
That's a good question.
There's a lot here. It's obviously a big comment. I think part of this is, I understand when you add an element of some kind, like the first game that added miniatures, as an example, it lets you do things that you can't do with just cards or vice. With cards, you go from like Go or chess to cards, which lets you do all these other things. So adding an element allows you to do things that haven't been done,
right?
Obviously. So in this case, he's saying, if the element becomes, these elements are digital representations or physical representations of a digital thing, you put on a VR headset and now you can like play a whole different kind of game. There is a lot you could do there.
Right.
And I don't know, technically it still would be a tabletop game. Maybe. So
I think that there's something, and I've talked about this before, there's something inherently valuable about the analog nature of tabletop games, which I think is lost in translation when you go into a virtual world. This includes playing online, even card games and stuff like that. Actually, I was in Japan a long time ago now, and they had something similar where you had a grid. It was in the arcade, but you brought your cards, and you played your cards, and the thing got red, and it was really cool. But I don't know if it brought the same sort of quality interactions as tabletop would. And I don't know if tabletop is, at least in my definition, tabletop without those quality interactions. But it's certainly a lot to talk about.
Here's the other thing too, though. Aside from the semantics of what category it would be in, is the reality is that you're probably not going to get that kind of new experience. I think of it very much like music, right? It's like, it's not that a new instrument comes out every year and that's why the new songs are cool or interesting or never been heard before. It's the way that you use the drums and the guitar and the synthesizer and all of this kind of stuff. And
you rarely add new instruments.
So I think that the forward motion for tabletop is one of perfecting and honing and combining in different and unique ways to make a new type of experience or a new feeling or just a refined experience. Can you feel the way you feel playing Catan better and more often with perfected mechanics in a different way?
And it certainly feels like there's in every industry, in every sort of creative endeavor, there seems to be cycles of expansion and contraction. And basically the expansion is a great amount of exploration. What can we do? What can't we do? And I think we may have reached the limits of the expansion part. And the contraction part comes now where you start to refine all these raw materials that have been brought in. Also, I think it's really worth noting, there was an interview with a band called Dawn of MIDI a long time ago.
Man, that's some music right there.
Yeah, look it up. Maybe They're really
why,
great.
why would someone like this?
So basically what Donamini does is they have a polyrhythmic sort of a thing, and what they started off doing is basically programming these things digitally. And then by programming it digitally, they realized that they could actually do it physically. But it wasn't until they went into the digital world and pushed that as far as they could go that they were actually able to realize it was possible.
Yeah.
So I think we may see, in kind of in the way that he's talking about, we may see a push in the digital world, a discovery of new material, but then bringing it back into this sort of analog world. So he or she, I'm actually not sure.
Well, on an upcoming episode, we're going to be talking about technology and tabletop, so we'll dive into this because I have some big.
Yeah, you were noticeably quiet on that.
Well, I was just letting you guys have at it, but I have some things that would open up a conversation way bigger than we have time for here.
Whoa.
So what about you? What's the answer you have?
Well, so mine is from Tom Burmeister. And he says, Ask Covenant, in the future seems obvious, I hope, but more diversity. Not just in representation, but also in core activities. Less combat, capitalism, and colonialism, points for alliteration. Haven't played it yet, but Fog of Love seems like a step in the right direction. But UA Rosenberg can keep making gardening and farming games forever. Please. P.S. Love the show. Wish you had a store on the UK shores. So
yeah. Nice.
So I actually looked up Fog of Love. This is the first that I've heard about it, and it looks fantastic.
What's the?
So the basic idea is that you and a partner are playing a romantic comedy. And there are various scenes that you play out, and there's various things that your characters need. And I'm actually kind of taken with it. Weird thing for the USA people, it's only on sale at Walmart, which is strange. But that's them's the breaks. But every review I've read is like really interesting. And here's the other problem, just a quick aside, is that the people that are commenting on our things, on our Ask Covenant, they recommend games. And then I look up games, and then I want games, and that's how it starts.
Yeah.
You know, it's my collection, but it looks like it's really fun. It looks like it's really fun to play with your partner, and it's something that I'm going to probably be looking more into. So, one thing real quick on that is I remember Steven's now wife, girlfriend at the time, he was teaching her how to play Spoils, potentially.
Maybe.
And her comment was that she was just never trained to think like a general. And I think that's very interesting.
And more specifically, I think, is that she had no interest.
Yeah.
It wasn't that she felt incapable of doing it. It's like, I just don't sit around thinking about how to allocate my armies.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I'm not interested in that.
And there's a whole lot more than combat capitalism and colonialism that needs to be explored. And I think, again, as we have now pushed out to the boundaries, there's a lot of stuff that was just touched on maybe or run over that can now be looked at again. And I think a lot of that direction is outside of these things. I think Fall of Love is a really
It's also, too, that like board games are you know, in their world, they're doing a pretty good job of getting a little bit more diverse. You have games like Photosynthesis, for instance, that, you know, it's like, no, there's plants doing stuff. And
trees
even Element and
well, even this UA Rosenberg, Feast of Odin, Patchwork, those kind of games are not directly competitional.
But what you don't see, and Tom mentioned this in a second comment on this, is you don't see that in the more lifestyle, expandable style games. Those seem to always revolve around combat, taking away stuff, aggression. That's almost why, to me, Netrunner, in that space, it actually stands out a little bit because it is more of a passive conflict rather than an active crushing each other kind of thing.
And
the game is hacking and preventing hacking kind of thing.
And even Arkham, which is kind of, these are the two really exciting games that are out there right now, especially for expandable card games, are kind of moving in that direction. I mean, there's a huge...
And I mean, Arkham obviously has combat sometimes, but like the game itself is more,
more
puzzling, solving, mystery
kind of
thing, which is cool. But there's obviously a ton of space for games that have nothing to do with killing the other person or conquering their land or...
If you're out there and you're interested in developing a game, I think it's very fair to say that the, let's just use Tom's words, the combat capitalism and colonialism niche is pretty well full right now. But there is a ton more that can be explored that you will be maybe the only fish in that pond.
And I like he says, you know, hopefully it seems obvious, but I think it's already kind of starting to happen, so I won't be surprised if in 5 or 10 years, State of Tabletop has shifted away from a lot of that kind of theme. So my comment comes from Lefty8957.
You got the easy one.
That's right. Classic Lefty.
You can forget,
and he says, I would love to see more of the big, ever-expanding games, particularly games like X-Wing and other miniatures games. Think a little bit more about future-proofing themselves instead of the inevitable refresh or version 2. Things like point costs built into an app so they can be hot-fixed, maybe a yearly balance pack to update old models with new components or mechanics without requiring an entire repurchase. Basically, I would like game designers to admit that these games aren't infinitely sustainable and to build these kinds of safety relief valves into the system so that it is possible to rein things in when inevitably they need to. And I totally agree. As a huge X-Wing fan and player, point costs not on the cards would make so much sense. But this kind of segues to someone who I think is already doing a decent job of this,
you know who's killing
which
it right
is
now?
Steamforged Games.
Yes, Guild Ball is
Doing it with Guild Ball,
so
which
well.
is Guild Ball is a game about soccer, fantasy soccer, football,
UK football.
American. I'm a U.S. citizen, so I think I can say soccer. So it's about soccer, but they have seasons. So every year they put out a new season, and as far as I understand, maybe some rules updates or whatever. But they also literally it's like a single pack, but they reprint all the stat cards in the whole game. So they put
based
new
on what
models out
happened
each
last
year and
season.
stuff. But they get feedback every year. And if season 1 happens, they print season 2. You might have the same characters. They may get a little older. Their stats may change.
They may
go
retire,
away.
which is really, really cool.
The best example, though, is still Infinity, right? I mean, they can upgrade stats in
That's another great example.
5 seconds, and they're all new.
And I think that's what
Print out all your Armulus.
we've seen that happening. And with miniatures games, obviously, that's really nice because you don't have stats on a model. So X-Wing, as the example here, is like you have a little base insert, but like if you'd been clever, you don't even necessarily have to have certain stats on the base insert or point cost on the card. But I would also be very interested in like how can card games incorporate this same thing? I picture Destiny as an example where they have the point cost on the character could easily be gone, and it's in a builder, and you can
That's true.
they already have the balance of the force list to adjust points. But then you think about like Netrunner, and it's like imagine being able to change the influence spread.
Yeah.
On like that one stat on Netrunner where it's like here's your minimum deck building requirements and influence, or your
Like on the ID,
base link
basically
on
have the ID blank, and then you have to. And I think any game that has components that you start with before you start building the deck can do that very easily.
because they just start on the table versus a rata of a card in your deck.
See, because the problem is like a game like L5R is, you have maybe your stronghold that you can tweak or have blank and you can do that kind of thing. But past that, it's like the majority of the action is printed on physical components that you're drawing from a deck. And the moment you start tweaking those values, it becomes very confusing. And leaving those cards blank is impossible. You don't have a reference book next to you to see what every card
that's
does.
the point of a card game is the fact that the text is on the cards and you don't have a lengthy rule book. So
I mean, even see a little bit of this with Netrunner, where they in their re-release, they updated some of the cards.
They updated some stuff.
And they moved the story forward about 5 years, so maybe we'll see a lot more of that.
But I think that's why if you're looking at the shape of tabletop, I would like to see game companies building in ways to give themselves, like a video game where they can release a
like
patch
video game designers.
where they can
Which is a good segue.
fix problems, moving down the road. I think that would be a great change to see, especially in the like expandable lifestyle style games.
Well, I mean, this is a problem that really, except for Magic, most people are just now encountering. So we're going to be just now seeing the solutions for that. So it's pretty exciting, honestly.
That's one of my constant, as we get further and further into the industry as it is and learn more, there just doesn't seem to be an eye towards sustainability on a new game when it comes out. It's like, hope it launches well, hope it releases well, have the first year of expansions kind of planned out and ready to go. But it's like, how do we build a system that we can come back and tweak and correct? And then so people get to like year 2, year 3, and it's like, well, we don't have any levers to pull, so we either have to reboot in the LCG case, or it's just like the game just starts tanking. I mean, even old school L5R in a lot of ways, from what I understand, was a similar kind of, it's that feeling of being crushed under your own weight. I think X-Wing is going through that right now. That feeling of like, ugh, there's just too much, and everybody can feel it, and you kind of know it, and you feel it going on.
It's the entropy.
Like, why did
of the
nobody
system.
think about this point in the game's success? It's like bet on your own success so that you can be there to fix it whenever you need to sustain the game.
Sure.
Which, like, going to the next section, we've got to talk like the this week section.
Yeah,
which I think
this
is we're
week.
getting to. It's just such a good segue. Is Jonathan and I particularly are super excited.
I've gone crazy about Godtear.
Speaking
you
of
got
Steamforged,
you got the flu. If
I
you
got
here, right here.
got
you
the fever.
you
Got the
guys out
fever.
there, whenever you get involved or you hear about a new game and then like all of a sudden it's all you want to learn about, all you want to talk about, all you want to talk to your friends about. You're sending out links. I am so deep in the Godtear mire. Like I've looked at their Facebook page. They have like 12 pictures up. I've been through them 100 times.
For listeners and viewers who have no idea what a Godtear is, can you just give me like your one sentence, like a 2 sentence? Here is Godtear.
Basically, as far as I can tell, Godtear is a new game by Steamforge, and it's worth noting they're alpha testing it right now. Alpha testing, which as far as I know is new to the industry.
It's the Steamforge makers of Guild Ball, Dark Souls, what was
Resident Evil, the board game they were doing.
It's hex-based.
And they come from a video game background.
And they come from a video game background.
Did a lot of video games, so we're seeing, first of all, video game licenses, Dark Souls, Resident Evil, so he clearly probably knows people in the industry that he used to work with. But then also methodologies, alpha testing, like really, really laid, like pulled back betas where you can start to really play with everything from the way that, like in Road Redemption when you were on the alpha team for that, and it was like the way the physics were changing.
Yeah.
Like the way, how high you can jump is different.
I mean, the great part of that is not only do you get a better game, ultimately, right? You get to test it before you just like put it out. But also you get to start building that community. Yeah. Like those people that are involved in the game on that level are great. But yeah,
so
Godtear.
A couple of things worth noting. One is that this is on a blog post. They're sending out the alpha kits, and then they're actually asking very pointed questions like, how tough is this guy to kill? How fun is this guy to play against? If this guy is more tough, could he be more fun? Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So like very like pointed questions, really testing, and getting answers and tweaking, The other thing that's cool, based on old Lefty's question here, is that the world itself, there's two bits of media out there. One by Beast of War, where they interview the guy, and then one podcast. And the world itself is a cyclical world. And so there are various fantasy races who survive this sort of apocalypse. Then they grow. Some of them grow strong because they're near these god tiers, which are basically meteors that come down. And then eventually they get strong enough, they collect all the god tiers and they ascend, and then the whole thing happens again, which allows them to like refresh the game on a regular basis. And he said something, one of the guys said something I thought was so cool, but he said, one of the things I've learned about Guild Ball is the thing that makes it most fun is the relationships and the growth of the characters. And so they really plan on adding all of that in to Godtear, so you can see the characters grow, you can see the aspects of the different gods.
And it's really cool in a game, instead of getting like, you're playing Destiny and you see like a young Rey, and then you get an older Rey in a different card, but literally it's like, no, in the game, this person that you know has evolved and grown and changed and been scarred or been hurt or been, gained the skill, and this is just now how they act in the game.
Yeah.
Right?
And it could be based on the way that the results from that last tournament turned out, where you played this aspect and won the thing, and then so now that story becomes, so it's very much a narrative-driven thing. Yeah. The other thing, just on a technical level, like on a more nuts and bolts level, is this is a miniatures game that is, from what we can tell and from what has been said, is going to be resin like X-Wing. So no putting together metal models, which
or like the Guild Ball entry kit.
Yeah, the 2-player starter thing.
So correct. So automatically you have not, completely shut out 95% of a potential audience. And then secondarily, you've got a hex-based system, which you mentioned, which means no tape measures.
No tape measures.
See, here's the thing. Every time that I've done I'm going to finally do a real tabletop miniature war game. Tried it for a bit with Infinity, even Arena Rex, which has a very limited movement system, so it's not so bad. First of all, biggest barrier, putting the models together. I still have Arena Rex models, haven't put them together. That will continue forever. So we're getting over that problem, which is great. But the second thing is, if I'm measuring 6 inches, is my opponent measuring it correctly? How do I turn? Are they doing
What happens if you bump a model?
Are they getting an extra ½ inch that is now putting them in range? Or is that technically cheating? Should I say anything about it? How do they round that corner correctly? Are they now in terrain or not? It's just a total mess.
And is it fun? I mean, you have to ask yourself, fundamentally, is it fun to measure out your turn and then realize, oh, well, because I miss it by ½ inch, they can charge me and I can't do anything back or something like that, which happens to me all the time. And I know that's because I'm new at playing miniature, but most people are.
It's not a game about, can you know 6 inches on the table?
Right.
Like, I'm not a carpenter. I'm not playing the game of carpentry to see if I can measure correctly. It's like, the best miniatures game we ever played was Monpok, and it had a grid system.
And I'm looking for a grid
speaking of
system
Monpok, something that makes me excited about Godtear,
right? You remember the old BattleTech games? Right. They had the big hexes.
Is that one of the lead developers here is DC, who was also one of the lead developers on Monster Apocalypse while we were playing. So that gets me really excited.
The key thing,
and this is like 10 years later.
The
so
crazy thing here is that it goes back to the history podcast. It also goes back to who you know, not what you do kind of stuff, right? That people talk about all the time. Literally met DC when he came down to the first MonCon in 2012, 2011?
2010.
2010. Had a great time.
almost a
DC,
decade ago.
we got along really well. We saw him at future Gen Cons.
I actually met him I went to a Monpok event, Palooza in California,
yeah.
and he challenged me to a chocolate shake contest.
That's right.
And he
He
dominated
destroyed me.
He's a monster when it comes to that. But anyway, so we meet him ultimately kind of in the MonCon sphere, keep up with him throughout Gen Con and whatnot. He eventually leaves Privateer Press, and then we're at Adepticon, which on the one hand we go because X-Wing, the open series there. On the other hand, it's because we have a lot of friends in Chicago from Monsterpocalypse.
That's right.
That all want to kind of try to maybe get together in Chicago. So we end up at Adepticon. We happen to see DC. DC happens to be there as a Steamforged now like lead designer, one of the main designers, and is there with one of the heads of Steamforged, Matt, right? He's one of the main guys, if not the main guy. Organizational charts in my head are tough. So then we end up having a conversation, and then it's like, and all of a sudden now we know Steamforged a lot better because of DC and Monsterpocalypse like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it all just
It's a small world.
It's
It's how,
really
it's how
crazy,
games work,
yeah.
right?
It just spirals out.
So yeah, I am super excited.
Excited about
Godtear.
Godtear.
And the thing is, there's so little information. They're actually doing they're going to be doing a question and answer soon. I can't wait. There's so little information, I'm going crazy.
The other thing,
Yes.
No factions.
Oh, that's right.
That's the crazy thing. Any model, so you choose like you're using aspects, right? And so you choose the aspect. It comes with like 1 to 5 units in their warband, and you choose 3 of those, 3 aspects. So you have probably like 20-ish. Well, actually probably less than that, 12-ish, 10-ish, depending on like one guy
Maybe
might come
even
with
4-ish, you know?
Well, one aspect might come with 1 unit, and then one aspect might come with 5. So it just depends. And then you play on a relatively small board, so it's all good there, and you can use any of the aspects with any of the other ones. So it's very much like
Choose your heroes and go.
like Dota or like any of the MOBA style games where you can have a team of any 5 heroes that you want to put together. How smart is that? Not only just from a player ease perspective, but from a marketing perspective. Imagine
anything you buy, you can use.
Imagine like you're playing a miniatures game and there are 4 factions and you collect 1, and it's like, okay, this amazing thing came out for this new faction. Don't care. I'm not playing the elves. I'm playing the dwarves. But if it's like, I love the dwarves. I'm going to take this dwarf aspect, and then this new thing came out. That looks interesting. I'll try that too.
Put it in there.
and conversely, it's also you find your 3 or 4 you really like.
You can do that forever.
You just don't have to. You don't have to necessarily grab all the stuff that comes
You
out.
can
So
tell
it's
we're talking fast.
It's
and
pretty
excited
cool.
young people.
Anything else this week for you guys?
I mean, yeah, we've taken a lot of time on Godtear, but my property, hashtag country stuff, my property caught on fire.
There's fire in them
It wasn't my
hills.
property, it was the property to the east of my neighbor's property.
But fires in the country are scary.
Fire. Well, we live in a very wildfire-prone area. In fact, I drive past a huge patch that was burned out a couple of years ago every day on my way to work. And my wife and I are pulling up to our house, coming up over a driveway, and we see this big glow. It's night. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning. We see this giant orange glow, and we're like,
Not ideal.
You're right. You shouldn't, even if it's a controlled burn, maybe 1 o'clock in the morning is not the best time for that. So we call up and ask the fire department if they know about it, and they must not have. So lo and behold, they sent somebody out. We actually let them through. Our neighbor's gate was locked, so we let them through our place, and they took care of it. They were still fighting at 4:30 in the morning when I went to sleep. The next day, my wife is there, and she's, quick aside, recently gotten into macrame. And so she's macrameing, and she can see out the window.
So country.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, it just happened.
I've
got
just
a gun
been
yet?
waiting. It's been waiting.
Don't answer that.
But so she sees a fire truck race down our driveway. Now, Zach, you may be asking yourself, that seems fine. But what you don't know is that our gate was closed, locked, and chained. So the fire department cut through our gate and comes racing down our driveway.
That's a bummer.
Yeah. And so eventually they end that, so I have to go deal with that. And then there's a third day,
That sounds
that's
fun.
Saturday, that again, smoke starts rising from that place over there, and another fire truck comes in. So
Another fire?
Another fire. Yeah, another fire. I just don't think they
from
had
the
gotten it out.
embers.
Could be from the embers. But Luckily, I was actually away at my parents' house for the Super Bowl, and I was worried that the whole thing was going to burn down. It did not. Everything is great. But
Land's
hey,
still there, house still there.
It's just stuff
Party
you
on,
gotta
Wayne.
get used to out there.
Yeah.
And that's been a big thing in my life.
Country living.
How
What
about
about
the
you?
Super Bowl? I mean, this week the
was a
Super Bowl
great
was an
game.
incredible game.
It was a great game.
think, yeah,
I honestly
great game.
did not think at the end Brady would lose.
I didn't
Spoiler
either.
alert.
I mean,
You don't know the result of the Super Bowl.
Everything you've ever seen is like, here's this guy that will just win for no reason.
Yeah.
Like, it just randomly at the end will just be like, well, just win it.
Yeah, I'll
And
score the
didn't,
points.
so
yeah.
it was
Didn't.
really fascinating.
And there was only, I think, worth noting, only one punt in the
was
entire
like,
game.
yeah.
Most yards, I think, of any Super Bowl.
Yeah,
It was
Well,
great.
it was the most yards in a playoff loss ever.
Oh.
Let alone Super Bowl.
That
It's like
was a really-
the
it was a
Patriots had
fun
more
game.
yards and lost than any
That's
team
pretty
ever
amazing.
in the
Yeah.
playoffs.
Anyway, good stuff.
Yeah,
Football.
for me,
Football
I
sports.
got sick and watched the Super Bowl from home, and that was all fun. I also recently was on the Knights of Ren and Discard to Reroll podcast for Destiny. Knights of Ren was doing a really cool. It's up now if you want to check it out, but they basically did a kind of like serial style Sarah Koenig story about
cool.
the development of the meta from last April when Spirit of Rebellion had a preview event until now. And so they interview 7 or 8 different players, and they cut it together and asking questions. And
Nice.
so
Oh, I'm gonna check
it's
that
very,
out.
it's a very interesting
Well-produced.
way of doing content.
I like the way
So
they do things.
Cheers to
man.
that.
I'm a big fan of Knights of Ren.
All right, on to the main topic, peripherals. A lot of this is going to be centered around tokens. We make a handful of peripherals. We'll also be
do.
talking a little bit about things like sleeves and deck boxes and stuff. But I want to rewind back to get started here.
Riddle me a riddle.
Rewind back to 2012, 2013. 2012, we opened our store.
Yep.
We started meeting new people into our community, and we all have a mutual friend, Derek, who started randomly coming to the store with just random stuff, right? It'd be like, we're playing Game of Thrones, and he's got this plastic house card that lights up.
Which is really cool.
And we're going to the First Worlds, and he makes these plastic house cards that are like, House Targaryen, and then it's got the Covenant logo instead. And we all went with like
Just trying
custom
stuff
things,
out.
cool
Yeah.
stuff.
And the old fat lab.
At one point I was like, man, you think you could make these in this? And it was the templates, the X-Wing templates. I was like, can you make templates in acrylic? I was like, if you could, I'd love to make them and sell them. And so one thing led to another, and we started figuring out how to produce and make these custom things. But we did the templates, and those went pretty well. And then we did Force tokens that were compatible with Star Wars LCG at the time.
Those L's, though.
Little
a
L
lot of
damage
shapes.
token,
That was a Zach Bunn original idea.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right.
We could put them not on the card at all.
Star Wars LCG, right? It's like a lot of tokens were going on these cards, so all of a sudden you just couldn't even see the card. And it was like, is there a way that we could not have tokens take up the whole card? And then we did damage
It
tokens.
did work, but then I saw everybody putting them on the card.
Yeah.
Oops.
That's fine. Anyways, the most notable thing to me, though, where I think it really started kicking into high gear, so 2013 is when Jonathan went from, the contract or / not getting paid at all role.
It's the best contract of all.
Yeah, the best. I'm good at those, apparently.
volunteer your time.
But anyways, Jonathan came around, and at the time I had been working on some very crude prototypes for what would become data
Yeah, you were going
tokens.
to chase your success with the templates and the
But
yes.
which actually Derek put a lot of work into.
Monster.
Oh,
So
unbelievable
it's
amounts of
excellent.
work. Yeah. So, but I was working with Derek and talking with Steven, and we had things coming out, and it was just like, here's a potential like credit token, right? And I remember I showed you guys, and you were both just like,
Nope.
no.
Nope, we can't do that.
And so, that started a whole new process. So I'd be curious to know, from that moment until we actually put data tokens out, if you guys even remember anything that happened and how that kind of progressed and what it, because it wasn't like, hey John, we're gonna hire you, you're gonna be our designer,
Right.
And it's like you're gonna design these products for us.
Yeah.
It was just like you were doing videos at the time, a lot of
and I could do
videos.
some
Jonathan's
motion
an
graphics.
artist.
Yeah, and that
That's
was the
the
thing.
key
It
thing.
wasn't like, hey, Jonathan, you have any experience whatsoever in designing tokens.
So
I
like,
did.
You can draw though. You've
I can
always
draw.
been the creative visual person.
Yeah,
So
that was my
that
qualification.
process,
as
right?
compared to anybody else,
What
yeah.
is it? What is that even like? If you can remember what the process looked like back then, what was that process?
Well, so there were basically two things that were going on. One was, well, actually three things. One was trying to decide what the token should look like, just like material-wise. How big should they be? What is an inch on the screen versus an inch in real life? I know I could have measured it, but like it was a
you'll learn it,
little confusing to me. Second was, what are the designs going to look like? And then third, how do I use Illustrator? I have no idea this crazy nutso vector program. And so all three of those things were going on. At the same time, Steven certainly had a vision for a more minimal token, and he had some ideas on what it needed to look like. So I remember I presented a couple of designs. They were soundly rejected. I don't think in any sort of like bad way, but just it wasn't anywhere close to what needed to be done.
When did the like hand-sized tags come in?
I think that was early on.
So there was, I remember, and they were, you know, before you really started working on them, I remember it was like, we were kind of just working with what we had.
Yeah.
No one was really a designer. We were kind of just messing around.
And it was that old laser, right? It was
well, it was at the time, it was the Fab Lab laser, which is the like, pay to be a member to like use this, and you shouldn't use it to make production stuff, but we were doing it anyway.
Just a little bit.
It may be at that point that Derek had already been kicked out of the Fab Lab. Because I remember a big thing was when we were running our early prototypes, we looked at them and we said, "This, you can't see anything." And one of the things we always and still always want to do is make sure that our tokens are visible from across the table. And that's where Derek, of his own volition, came up with a fantastic technique on how to paint fill these things, which had just, as far as we knew, hadn't really even been done before.
Yeah, the paint fills were
killer.
And
there were a handful of, not only were the paint fills still just awesome, but it was also the, I don't know at what point the like, we call it parallax, but the double-sided tokens that are semi-translucent and then have a design that kind of plays off of itself.
That was when it happened.
Yeah.
That was when the magic
So
of
that's what happened is like as I said, I was a motion graphics designer for forever. That was sort of what I was originally doing. And the idea of parallax is really big in motion graphics. That's how you make things look real. And so I was looking at that and how can I make this different? How can I go as far as I can go? Which is sometimes a thing that I do to my detriment, and sometimes we'll talk about conquest.
It's a growing process.
It's a growing process. But I wanted to do something that no one had done before. And not knowing much, I thought that would be possible. And so eventually, I decided that parallax was a good way to make it look three-dimensional and for that to happen.
Well,
anyhow.
The crazy thing of that, for people that aren't aware, is that just getting a token, so like this is kind of the standard process of making acrylic tokens. You have a laser and you have a like sheet of acrylic. And so the laser goes across and it like etches the design in, and then it comes back and it like literally cuts the token out, because the power of the laser needed to do an etching versus cut through the plastic is much different. Yep. So it's two different steps. But the reality of getting the design in the right spot to then cut the token out is its own challenge.
Yeah.
But then literally taking that acrylic, turning it over, doing another design and then cutting it out and making it not only all within the circle that you're cutting out for the token, but literally line up in such a way that it creates that parallax effect where it actually plays off each other is not, I mean, that's insane.
No, yeah,
like at the time it was like,
on that.
We only did it because we knew we didn't know we couldn't.
Yeah,
that was really
right.
that kind of
vibe.
Yeah.
And actually, I remember Steve and I had gone back and forth quite a bit at that point on what the credit should look like. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night and sketching out this sort of idea/dream I had, and that's what eventually became our credits. So that was that. And then
go ahead.
Well, I mean, then we worked with Derek. We got the paint fill. We did the front and the back. We eventually worked and got all the acrylics because I'd never worked with real life stuff before. Honestly, like
we had to choose if we were going to do like neon acrylics.
I remember that. It was
normal.
like two of the tokens were like there was like a neon orange and a neon green. I have a picture of that somewhere.
And we were bummed because the dark acrylics didn't really let that parallax shine through as much as we wanted.
Like red, right?
Was
it's
it
like barely translucent.
Was it worth the sacrifice, like to stay all in the same transparent acrylic family? Or should you go to some weirder like neon type things where you could see the parallax better, but it clearly stood out as being different from the rest of the tokens. Yeah, and that was consistency is one of my favorite things.
Yeah, we worked through all that, and the real exciting part was then we put them up for sale. And
it worked.
And it worked.
And it worked. Yeah,
and it worked.
Great.
Were they the ones that were on back order for like
we
6
talked about
months?
in the history.
The relief
and
that
so
came from that.
and we were like, oh my gosh, these are making us money. So then we kept doing it. Unfortunately,
to varying levels of success.
Because again, like I was saying earlier, like I wanted to try to push it farther than I'd ever pushed it before, and we eventually got to conquest tokens.
Which that's where you're going here.
I pushed too hard.
Yeah.
If you guys remember, we don't even sell them anymore. The war tokens.
First version.
The first
second version, I think, was just excellent.
Well, there's a reason why the second version was excellent. But the first version, I wanted to do like a 3-layer 3D, no longer a parallax, but like actual 3-dimensional
like
gears
I want to cut
stuff.
a skull into this.
Yeah, and like, okay, well, we can burn this twice, and Derek and I were working together, and we can burn it out. That'll create a 3rd layer. And it just went too far.
Well, you can do anything,
Well,
but it costs money.
I mean, that was, it wasn't that it looked bad or wasn't a good token, I don't think. It was just like it became expensive to do.
Yeah, because every pass was an extra dollar amount.
But it also, I think, it reminds me of our earlier conversation from the front of this episode, which is when you're trying to basically add new tools to your toolbox to give you more space to play with when you're designing something, like even a game.
Yeah.
And it was like, you start realizing that like, there's a reason that games include dice, cards, miniatures, and a board, is that these are the parameters that work and are enough to give you the space to do something. And so it was just like, man, we are trying every which way to go a different direction. And I remember one of the tokens that we kind of finagled with for a while were the squad tokens.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was in that moment of you're wanting to try to figure something different out. And I remember the three-dimensional stuff you were wanting to try with that.
I had some really cool stuff.
Before we get to that, I'll come back around to that. So what do you think are the biggest changes in the token and product design process from the first time or two?
Yeah.
And how, like, what were the milestones along the way?
So the biggest milestone was, one, learning how to use Illustrator.
Sure. Getting good.
Getting good. Because the data tokens, I think I've talked about this multiple times, but really it was like a 10 pixel by 10 pixel thing that I used, and none of my stuff was lining up because it just had nowhere to go. It was stupid. Anyone who's a designer out there, I apologize. It was just crazy.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry that I ever
I'm
saw
sure
that.
you've never made a mistake. Anybody else?
But the biggest thing was that I took some time and I went through a calibration process to where, because I used to design in After Effects for a very long time. Actually, the majority of the tokens have been designed in After Effects, so I just knew the program better. And I created a filter that I could put on top of all my designs that showed me how it would look like, what it would look like in real life. Because
that was such a big deal.
Yeah, it was a huge deal. I was used to designing in the digital space where it's a one-to-one thing, but whenever you transfer it to the real space, like the laser has a certain width, it has a certain angle, and all of these things have to be considered. It can only go so small, it can only go so big. And so once I had that, the next set that came out was the new War Token set, the new, and I think that I was very pleased, very pleased with how that turned out.
Yeah, and I think I remember you talking very specifically when, you know, I mean, it's the difference between like, you have literally two flat images, right? It's like, oh, here's the front of the credit, here's the back of the credit.
Yeah.
And I think they would work like this.
Yeah.
And then you have to wait until you actually literally produce a prototype to see it, and it's like, oh man,
didn't work.
Not quite. But then you developed it to a point now, it's like you'll be designing a token and it's on your screen.
Yeah.
It's like you can pretty much see it, you can flip it around.
I think this is probably the best lesson, especially for any aspiring like designers of peripherals or people considering the space, is taking the time, and really anything that you're pursuing, it comes back to taking the time to set yourself up to be more effective and efficient in whatever it is that you're doing. And anybody who is in charge of processes or even like managing a company or a department or whatever, like being very active about saying, rather than just output, stop, like at least every once in a while and say, stop the output. What can we do to create better and more efficient ways of creating those outputs in the future? Can we establish better systems? Do we need better processes? What is it? And so like being able to come back in and say, I need something that can give me a better understanding of what the finished product's gonna look like, so that I can save time and money on prototyping, on my own design work, like all these kinds of considerations. And then tokens become easier to make, which means that we can get from prototype to finished product faster, which means the whole cycle speeds up. And so it's just really always worth investing in systems that will then create you better things that will give you more time to invest in systems and
And it's a hard thing to do. I was actually listening to a podcast recently that said that people who have an excessive amount of what they call grit, which generally people who are self-starters have, tend to always be looking for a new challenge and tend to chafe under the sort of going back and creating systems. And I know certainly that I did. But even it's not like, I'm saying this because you may encounter it and it may not be easy. It may be something that you're thinking right now, well, I don't want to do that. I want to create the new best thing. A lot of times you'll need the foundation to create the new best thing. And that's something I had to learn in a very serious way.
So looking back, obviously you create a system so you can see the token. We created a ton of systems around our token production processes and whatnot.
Go overboard.
Yeah, we maybe did a little bit, but it's way more efficient now. Trains run on time.
Now that we kind of pulled back some of those systems, it's way more efficient.
Yeah, so
it was kind of archaic.
Looking back, I would be curious to know for each of you, and I have my own answer, but among all the tokens we've created over the years, what is the token that you are the fondest of?
You want to know something, Zach? The token I'm the fondest of hasn't come out yet.
Oh, he did it. He just did it.
What?
Steve Jobs over there. Somebody put that on a poster. And
Where's my turtleneck?
Hang it in your wall.
The product I love the most is the one I haven't put out yet.
Jonathan Woolley, 2018.
I can see it on my desk. I can see it on my desk right now.
Oh yeah, you're being real about that.
Yeah. It's not like, I haven't come up with it yet. No, it's like it's. We've been trying to source these materials forever. Super frustrating.
What are you talking about?
A little bit.
Did we just recently get
a
it?
token.
Yeah.
I mean, but
Token.
it's a bigger.
Oh,
Yeah.
a bigger
okay,
token.
okay. All right, fair
I am-
answer.
I am super excited about that.
Just say it.
Can I say it? All right, fine. It's the we've been working on developing.
Don't tell what it is. Don't tell what it is. You know what I mean?
Well, why don't you do it there, Mr.
I don't know what the token is.
Advertiser?
But I'm saying don't explain what it looks like or any of that kind of stuff. Just what is the game? What's the token?
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, it's
L5R rings, is that what
L5R.
Okay, yeah, I had no idea what you were
it's
saying.
L5R rings.
So it's reading for L5R.
Yeah.
Don't explain why it's awesome.
Oh, okay,
necessarily,
okay.
but just that way when it does come out, people are like, oh, that's the
If
thing
it
you're
comes
talking
out,
about.
If it comes out, that's the problem. That's
stuff.
the problem with working in the real world, and this is one of the biggest lessons and hardships I've had. And I think a lot of people that go through Kickstarter run into the same problem. Whereas, like turning an idea, because we've been in this digital world forever, turning an idea that has been digital and works fine digitally into materials that then efficiently get produced and sent out, and the quality control is consistent. It's
That's
very
key.
difficult to do.
Quality
Yeah.
control across like 3 different. Let's say you have 3 different suppliers that you need 3 different pieces of this thing to put it all together. You just need one miss.
Yeah.
Well, that's
ultimately
what-
it just goes back to some guy with a mine or an axe, or getting this material. Like this is real stuff.
It's a real material.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's what happened to our executive credits that were part of the data tokens, which
Yeah.
is just the
Aluminum
the,
couldn't
the
source it
discs
anymore.
just couldn't get. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, had to go.
They quality tanked.
So
That's what happened
yours
on that.
is the.
L5R rings.
And those, I will say, I mean, there's a reason it's taken us so long to put them out. Is that it's asking, what can we not do, and then
Yeah.
trying to do that.
yeah, I said, I tried it. Sometimes I push the limits a little bit too
Yeah.
far.
And
I think
honestly,
these
there's
turned
just a
out.
lot of L5R tokens out there. There's so many tokens out there for that game. There's a massive amount.
Just
So it's
regular
like,
acrylic kind of thing. So, what about you? Do you have
can
any
we do?
tokens that you're particularly fond of?
Oh man, I mean, I love the data tokens. Obviously, I think every time I use the 1 in 5 credits, I'm so happy with that
The
design.
data token credits, yeah.
I love, as much as I have this love-hate relationship with the more intricate, like the arcane tokens. I think are really nice as well, and we've been really interested in borders and those kinds of things. But the data tokens kind of stand alone. They have that kind of. The engraving is standing by itself. The token is kind of disappearing into the background, as opposed to really adorning a token and making it feel like a token, right? So I like that about the data tokens, especially the credits. And man, I have been loving the Mythos board investigator set
That
up.
really turned out.
Those the brains and the hearts. And the art on those I think was just really nice. So.
Well, you know why the art was so nice is because the original Arkham art is
Unbelievable.
amazing. The original Arkham, they're amazing. I was going to mention this in a later thing, but one of the things that I always start out doing is I approach every token
It's part of your process, right?
Yeah, it's part of my process. I approach every token like this.
Same thing with data tokens.
Yes. And I just say, the people who have made these tokens have messed up. And I just have to find out where. So it may be kind
the
of
original.
How could they be
hubristic.
better?
Yeah, how could they be better? Like, what did they not see that now I had the luxury of seeing by them coming out first and me being able to kind of test around? And the Arkham board is a very when you look at the Arkham tokens, when you look at the card backs of the Arkham game, the whole game is beautiful. The art design on that is beautiful and presented a huge challenge. So luckily we were able to come up with the Arkham board.
But I think that's another interesting part of what you do, because I know you pine over this for a long time, which is not just the original tokens, but the source material, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Where I remember with squad tokens, they were compatible with X-Wing. It's the amount of time spent just watching X-Wing, watching clips, watching movies, watching Star Wars, looking at comics, is immense to just kind of ingrain yourself in this.
What does the Empire look like?
What does it feel like to be in the Star Wars universe, right?
What's the smallest possible unit of design that can be used to show that it is part of this universe without being overly so.
So, kind of related to that, my favorite thing we've done, you won't be surprised once I tell you, is the Awakened Navy
templates.
templates. Those are the most, just still, every time I get those templates on the board, I'm just like, these look great.
Well, thank you.
And they look like Star Wars, and I feel like the Empire and the First Order when I'm throwing them down, and they're thematic with my stuff, and it's just like, and it's red and black, and it's great. And the tokens that go with it, right, the focus tokens that match it, it's like I, as a player, just love that set to death.
To be fair, the red and black is pretty much all I needed to do to
It was over,
you on
but
board.
those templates came out, and it was just like,
Just the shirts.
woo,
Right?
yeah.
The whole
So,
company.
when it comes to templates and tokens and boards and any of this kind of stuff, what aspects of it do you think make it a good token, right? Like what's a high quality?
What is a good token?
So this is what I was thinking about on the way in, and I want to start this by saying that words aren't my best suit. That's probably why I do design, is because I can
such a great way of saying
communicate,
that.
a lot better. So I'm going to try here. But a good token for me is basically it rides the line between being what it is and what it could be. Let me explain
Like
that.
concrete versus abstract.
Concrete versus abstract. And I think that a good token is not necessarily abstract. I think it's totemic, like a totem. And I think it's a place where the user can put their imagination. And it's a framework for the imagination, but it's not a cage for the imagination.
So do you have
If
an
that makes any
example?
sense. I have
of
a great example.
Very practical.
A chess piece.
Okay.
I think is dead on, because you look at a chess piece and you know it's a king, you know it's a queen, you know it's a rook, but you don't it hasn't colored in the entire picture for you. One of my notes here.
Like King Richard.
Yeah, it's not King Richard. It tells the beginning of the story. It doesn't tell the rest of the story. And I think every token that I've made or that we've designed that has been good does that. Like the data tokens, they tell you the start of the story, but it's up to you to finish the rest of it. And
they don't look like a literal credit.
Right.
Necessarily.
They look like kind of the idea of a credit. And another really good example, if you want to see this, is the evolution of Ken Sugimori's Pokemon art. The original red and blue Pokemon art was this watercolor, a lot of negative space, and it just started talking about it. But then as they evolve, the lines get heavier, the color gets more consistent. It's it goes from this is what it could look like to this is what it is. And that's what I always try to pull back away from this is what it is to the this is what it looks like.
So are you aiming for the middle or are you aiming for the
first,
the abstract?
beginning?
Well, the absolute abstract is like a checkers piece, and I think that fails.
Yeah.
Or backgammon, who knows what's going on there.
Yeah.
So it needs to be. That's why a chess piece is so good. It needs to have, like they said, the framework, maybe even the bones, but it can't go too far, or it starts to lose it. And I actually think it attracts less people that way. I think the stuff that's really heavily drawn in actually sort of a lot of people shy away from. I don't know if they think it's juvenile. I don't know why they do it necessarily, but I think that it is not as powerful as it could be.
So how much you have the design and the aesthetic and the theme, right? And does it feel like, if it's supposed to be compatible with Star Wars, as an example, you want it to kind of feel like it somewhat fits in that universe or with your faction or whatever. But how much of a token's value and, if there was a quality score from 0 to 10, right, is also about its usefulness or problem-solving ability, where it's even the thing about the credits, for example, which is why I think a lot of people that use them love them, is they have the one credit on one side and the advancement on the other, whereas the standard Netrunner credit was one credit on one side, just kind of blank on the other.
It's technically an advancement.
It's an investment,
It was an advancement, but let's
Yeah.
it's like the 5 credit didn't have a 5 advancement.
Saying
on the back,
perhaps it
right?
was too abstract using.
So it's pretty abstract, but you have, as an example,
surface.
we eventually introduced 2 credits, 3 credits, recurring credits, and even with a 2 credit, right, it's like being able to put a 2 advancement with a single swipe, right? It's like I'm taking these 2 credits and I'm turning them into 2 advancements, flipping it over, and so there's the literal making it easier to play, but then there's also the how much of it is about can I easily tell what's going on? Is it?
Yeah. Well, listeners to the podcast will know that I love the idea of creativity is born of restraint and dies of freedom. And so whenever I'm approaching a token or a new set or a template or whatever, the first thing it has to be is readable from both sides of the table. So that is it has to be useful, right? Because anyone can make anything that's beautiful. If your opponent doesn't want you playing with them, they're never going to see the light of day. They have to be able to read, have to be useful, have to be able to read from the other side of the table, have to be functional. So it starts there, and then beauty comes.
They also have to actually. I've seen this a lot. They have to actually solve problems. Looking at our own processes, going too far, pulling back, those kinds of things. It's very easy to design something that seems to make X, Y, or Z easier, where it's like you can fit this into this other thing, and then that's a very easy way to track this thing, and then you can build this, and you start to say, but in reality, I don't actually need to do that.
Yeah.
That actually, when I'm playing the game, that actually is more work to do the easy solution than it is to just have a double-sided token that is more or less more standard than it is fancy. But you can get in situations where it's like you can slot in all this stuff and put all this stuff here, and it's like, but that actually isn't solving a problem.
It's making it harder.
It's making it harder. So what are the actual problems? And then try to get all of those out of the way in the simplest way possible. And then make it pretty.
The original Destiny shield that was designed was a 3-piece shield that could fit together, and I thought it was cool.
It is
just
cool.
like I thought. Well, it is cool. But then I was watching people play when we were doing playtests with it, and nobody was using it like that. 0 people. So it's cool, but it's useless.
Yeah, it's actually adding work instead of just making it
and
simpler.
confusion. And it's like, you got 2 little shards
versus
there.
like obviously
It's taking you away from the game.
It ended up as a 1 and a 3 on the other side, and so like if if someone hits you for 2 and you have 3 shields, you can just flip a token instead of having to like.
That's the other thing too. It has to get out of the way of the game.
It has to get out of the way of the game.
It shouldn't cover up the experience that you're having. It should just make it easier and smoother. So I don't think a good token is ever going to be the focus of the moment in any kind of gameplay environment.
It should be adding to it. It shouldn't be the whole of it.
Yeah, or even just I don't even know adding to it, but adding to it in a very specific way in that it isn't even there.
Yeah.
Like you're simply tracking a board state, which you should make it just as easy to do that as possible. So if you're ever thinking, what am I supposed to do with this now, or how is this supposed to work, or where am I supposed to put this, then you've lost the moment of the game for that instant. But if I'm playing a game of Netrunner and I'm easily moving between credits, I don't even know that I'm doing it. To me, like that's where the new token is great.
Yeah.
So to kind of take a different branch real quick before we hop off of the token train, we have the Mythos board.
Yeah.
So this is a peripheral for a peripheral.
Yeah.
You have the Mythos tokens.
Peripheral.
And then, you're watching people play, and it's like, man, or you're playing yourself, right? You guys
I
were
was
talking about
playing
this.
and I was annoyed.
And it was like, man, these tokens are everywhere. Is this resource mine or yours or the board's? So were there any, obviously designing a board is way different than designing a token. So were there any unique challenges in, you have some of the things, right, where it's like you want it to be thematic and you want it to be useful and you want it to help you play easier. But like, what were some of the unique challenges in designing a totally new kind of product?
You know what's fascinating about this conversation? First of all, it's turned into essentially an interview of Jonathan, which is cool. But it's that you legitimately don't know the answer to this because it's just like Jonathan's like in his design sphere, and you're on the other end of things, doing your part of the organizational
Click-clacking is the
duty. Click-clacking.
Right,
And then this product shows up, and it's like, oh, that's amazing. And it's like, hey, this looks great, and we're happy about it.
I don't need to know any of the other details.
But then, so now you're legitimately just having this conversation.
Yeah, that's the fun thing is like when you mention interview, it's like, oh, this does kind of feel like an interview, and it's like, and I'm like. It's really funny that I just don't know the answer to this at all, actually.
And it's also, so the idea comes from Zach and then through Steven to me. Although this, to be credit where credit due, it was Steven who was like, Arkham needs something. I think we should do an Arkham board.
We got to pump these investigators.
The process was like, hey, I think idea comes over here, and then
I want to be more organized.
Yeah, well, which is no surprise. But then it's like we have our meeting, and you're like, am I crazy for wanting to try this? And I was like, no, I'd love to see if we can do something that we think would be great and people would love. And if it works, cool. If not, like we have to keep exploring.
Yeah.
If not, then Steven and Robert can use it whenever they play Arkham.
Yeah.
We'll know.
Yeah. Sometimes at some point you just design the things you want.
Yeah.
And then at worst case, you have the thing that you wanted.
Yeah.
And at best case, a lot of other people also agree. So that was my basic only involvement was like, is it okay to spend time and resources on developing this? And it's like, yeah, go for it.
And that's the cool thing about the Mythos boards and about anybody out there listening who is interested in creating physical products is so much of it is this kind of problem-solving mentality. And Derek's really good about that. The being with any kind of a manufacturer, producer that is also has ideas about how to accomplish something is really important. But it started out as everything did, a sheet of acrylic and a laser. And then it's like, well, how do we need more elevation on this. So it's like, well, what if we just start pasting acrylic together?
I remember
kind of
it was
stuff.
like a piece of acrylic with a cutout piece of wood glued onto it.
Yeah.
And the glue
that the
wouldn't
tokens could fit into, and then it's like you drop it once and it goes.
Yeah.
Well,
And
can't
boy,
sell
did we.
that. Yeah.
And we
so
did
then
that too, like with the ring you were talking about. I remember throwing that against a wall,
Yep.
and well, you'll see when you see it.
So then it spiraled out from there. And I think that for the boards, it seems like that was the main thing, is it wasn't so much a design challenge in terms of what is it going to look like. We knew what it was supposed to look like, like almost immediately. The one thing we didn't know was that people would so commonly use the token pool on the left side instead of the right side.
I did not know that.
All through our design and development, it was like the token pool's on the right and your stuff's here.
But
Most
then you
people
can
are
just go,
right-handed, right?
whoop.
But then you can just, so it's like, oh, well, I guess that worked out.
Nice. Yeah, that was
Happy
pretty
about
good.
that.
The real challenge for me was pulling it back. Honestly, there used to be, I think it was 6 layers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers of stuff on there, and then it's just like, no, this isn't gonna work.
And it gets more expensive
And
every
it gets
time.
more
you
expensive.
I may have gone a little too far.
You may have gone a little
in
too
few
far.
places.
And another thing I'm fond of saying is that you have to sort of find the extremes before you can find the middle. And I definitely found the extreme on
very
the
good at that.
Arkham
Yeah,
board,
you're kinda-
and then pulling it back to the middle.
Yeah.
And then Derek was just awesome to work with. He started, well, maybe we should try resin. And then it's like, well, maybe we can make it like copper.
It's like,
oh,
we can
that's
try
great.
resin. And
Yeah, and one thing leads to another, and then all of a
we can
sudden,
start
Mythos boards
wheels
come out.
spinning up
Well,
again.
I am very excited to see
literally.
what is next in the Mythos line. For real.
yeah.
So,
Well, it's really been a blessing to work on. I had no idea whenever data tokens started that they would be received.
and that's the way
that alone has been
I mean,
a
at
dream
that
of
point,
mine.
you didn't think, right, that you would be spending. So that was 2013.
Yeah.
It's 5 years later.
Yeah.
Ultimately, and you had no clue you would be spending a vast majority of your time designing those kind of products.
I will tell you something very personal. That whenever I was young, whenever I would throw a coin in the fountain at the mall or wherever,
What a specific memory.
my wish, I don't remember it word for word, but one of it was that my art would be able to be seen by people around the world. And to realize that has been amazing.
That's wonderful.
It's really
Crazy,
been,
yeah.
it's really
Because it's not
been-
just in the tokens either. It's the
No.
design of our video assets. and
Yeah,
it's the design of-
it's I never really thought it would happen, and it's just been it's humbling.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's humbling for me to be involved in that. All right, we're going to move on to questions. You can use the hashtag AskCovenant to get your questions answered right here on the show. First question is from PHTZ. Thanks for the videos. What sleeves are you guys using in this series on one of our Learning Destiny videos?
Tell
And
them, Zach.
This is a question we get a lot because people who are new to tabletop gaming, usually once you've been in tabletop for 3 or 4 years, you kind of find the sleeve that's for you and go from there. And so for us, actually, when I was a kid, I remember I was playing Pokemon, the TCG, back when I was 9 or 10, and I got a handful of boxes of the Dragon Shield sleeves, right? So they had, blue for my water decks and red for my fire decks and yellow for the electricity decks.
Yes.
And one of the biggest things and one of the big upsides of Dragon Shield was that they came in a box.
Save money.
So the box was big enough to be a deck box. So every time you got a thing of sleeves, it was like, oh, I have a yellow deck box that's got a cool dragon on it.
By the way, you want to talk about good design driving sales? They didn't have to put them in a box.
An
allowed
actual
you. That's
usable box,
good
right?
design.
Like, for instance, the Ultra Pros generally were coming in the plastic rip apart.
You could hang them on a shelf.
Which I'm
right?
sure makes sense, but that's why you gotta.
From a manufacturing standpoint, that's significantly easier,
And that's why they're
lighter,
cheaper.
cheaper, and they are slightly cheaper. But then what really happened is, so the evolution, that's fun, nice little pun there for Pokemon. It's just, it just hit me, right? I'm catching myself more. I accidentally do puns all the time. But anyways, the evolution from there got into the Dragon Ball Z TCG by Bandai, I think it was at the time, and then got into the Star Wars TCG by Wizards and the Star Wars CCG by Decipher, and so on and so forth. But like 3 or 4 years later, these sleeves I bought when I was playing Pokemon, I'm still using. And it's like, I have friends who are buying
You
new
have to clean them, literally.
Yeah.
You have to clean Dragon Shields.
my friends who had bought, the Ultra Pro or there's some like foreign
KMC?
I guess Dragon Shield's foreign as
KMC's
well.
been around for a while.
But it's like a
Ultimate
lot of the
Guard.
Yu-Gi-Oh players would use these other sleeves, and it's like they're just burning through sleeves every 6 to 12 months. And it dawned on me, it was like, I still have my sleeves.
Right.
And the boxes that I'm storing. And actually, right, it's funny, my Star Wars CCG decks are literally still in the original Dragon Shield deck
That's
boxes.
cool. That's cool.
And that's like forever ago.
That's really great.
But anyways, that
good.
led to eventually,
Good design.
Dragon Shield obviously kept improving their quality and stuff. And the one problem Dragon Shield had forever was when you occasionally had to buy new sleeves, your deck would be like this tall. Like it'd be like 3 or 4 inches off the table. And then they were so slick that like if you bumped into them,
like,
the deck literally just goes to Houston. It's just gone. So recently they put out the Dragon Shield matte sleeves.
Yeah.
And we have just fallen in love with those sleeves. That's what it's. We also sell Ultra Pro, or we used to. I don't know if we do anymore.
I think
in
we're
the local
just on
store.
Dragon Shield
But
right now.
they have them in
best.
like a bunch of different colors. They're just plain sleeves, but they're matte. They don't have the sliding problem nearly as much. The thing about the old Dragon Shields is once you broke them in, though, it's like a good pair of shoes. Like you have them for life, right? That's
true.
But
You had to break them in.
they're just high quality. They last a long time. The matte has fixed one of the only complaints you might have. You get kind of a free deck box for storage if you need or want that. And
It's great when you're starting out.
I've also interacted at this point, talked several times with the owners of Dragon Shield.
Well, they
and
bought
stuff,
spoils there.
and they bought spoils, which was a cool
Which
experiment.
was like, oh, great. We like these guys.
But yeah, we really like them. I think they're genuinely good. They're from Denmark, and they
Nice.
just produce a really high quality product. So if you ever see us using sleeves videos, the odds are
Dragon Shield.
those are the ones.
All right.
Almost 100%.
Yeah. Very. All right, next question from Ed Wang. Not related to this episode, but X-Wing seems to get almost no mention from you these days.
Ugh.
Has it fallen out
Ooh,
of
bringing the
favor?
heat. Bringing the heat on the questions. Here, let me field this one, Zach, as somebody who's unaffiliated essentially with X-Wing.
Side note, I love X-Wing.
You do. I mean, everybody loves X-Wing. The game, the system itself, everything about X-Wing is great, but it runs into the same problem that all these LCGs have run into, that any of the expandable games that don't have a plan for essentially sustainability run into, is that, listen, the reality is any game that has subjective inputs. So X-Wing, you could have X-Wing with no problem if it was just numbers. And you could have a spreadsheet that assigned certain point costs to those numbers, and then every ship was just numbers and plastic. And it's like you could do that game forever, because it would
also be boring.
It would also be boring, but you'd also have to kind of like eventually you'd have to figure out what the numbers were, because like going from 3 to 4 is not a simple linear increase. It's kind of exponential. So if you were able to figure that out, you could just run equations and create new ships every day, right?
The Paul Heaver method.
The Paul Heaver method.
He did figure that out, actually.
The problem is that you have designers that are adding subjective material to the numbers.
Well, and even
abilities,
even just
pilot
the
abilities.
Abilities, it's not, just by nature of the ships having the pilot abilities means that like you can't just point cost out every ability.
Right.
And
Because
abilities
we
that
said,
work with each other, the synergy creates
once
bigger things.
Once words enter the equation, it's over.
Those darn words.
So any game that has
Numbers
any kind
count,
of
so.
subjective inputs, which is why card games are the worst about this, because every card is subjectively balanced by the text that the designer decides to put on it. Should it be 3 or 4? Should it have a condition or not? Yada, yada. There are no easy solutions to those problems. You're going to have a sustainability problem over time. You're going to keep adding cards, or you're going to keep adding pieces, or in this case, ships for X-Wing, and more importantly, cards for ships for X-Wing. And you're going to get to a point where you're staring into the abyss of what do I release that doesn't tilt the scales in a crazy way? And so we're there. So what happens with X-Wing? I think the reason that falling out of favor isn't true at all. In fact, casual X-Wing is probably as good as it's ever been. But in terms of just like what's going on with X-Wing, I'm waiting. Because we all know they have to do something. Every X-Wing player
They've
who's
done it
like
with Game of Thrones.
followed the game forever,
Well, and
you
we- you
know
know,
when you get to the point.
We talked about it last week on the
Something has
State
to
of
happen.
Tabletop episode, which is it's at the top of that list. It's a
Yeah, it was
huge
number one
game.
in 2017
So like
spring.
something's got to give and something's got to happen, and I hope they put into place some kind of sustainable mechanism. The other thing that's worth pointing out, besides the fact that at this point X-Wing is kind of in that state as a game where all that's going on, is kind of a shift in our own content thinking and strategy,
Brought that up.
which is, we used to do a lot. We'd unbox almost every product that came out that we were selling. Like any game that we're supporting, right, that's in the category, we'd unbox and we'd do gameplay videos of them. We'd film games from at Worlds, and we would do stuff. And over the past year or two, we really started looking at our own efforts, and we covered this a little bit in the couple episodes back on the history podcast and talking about what we're doing. But this isn't just X-Wing that may feel this way, especially if you came to know and love us through, like, I know a lot of people love our X-Wing unboxings and our X-Wing gameplay videos, but those are just content types that we're really just not doing right now. We're really focused on the learning series. We did Learning L5R, Learning Netrunner, and now we're doing Learning Destiny with more to come, which are really geared on and focused at helping someone who's interested in a game get into a game and get involved in the community, because we just decided that's where our effort could be best spent.
That's a sustainability problem that we can actually maybe help solve, right? Like, we can't redesign a game, but we can surely get a new player interested enough to go find a community to play in, which is what you have to have in any kind of a tabletop game.
And so, truth be told, honestly, love X-Wing. I think all of us love X-Wing. It's a great game. I think it's such a great entry point into tabletop gaming, into expandable games, into miniature games and all that. But we're kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. Because if there is going to be a reboot or a version 2 or a version 1.5, we would rather wait to do like a learning series. I'd love to do a Learning X-Wing series. And in fact, we had a tactics series designed to do for X-Wing, but just started feeling like at some point something's got to give. And so we would rather save that energy for that point. And if it happens, we're going to be. Trust me.
We'll be there.
There'll be a lot of X-Wing content coming your way. So at this point, it's kind of FFG's move on X-Wing, and we're crossing our fingers and hoping, because I think that's one of the best tabletop games of all time. And I would love to see it continue being one of the most successful games in the market.
And Steven sort of said as much, but I think it's really worth noting that this is a limited resources. Our business has limited resources, time and money. And if we can do something that gets a bunch of people into a game, that we know is going to have sort of a couple more years in it, that is right now way more of a favorable move, given what we have and the amount of good that we can do. So it hasn't fallen out of favor. It just fell into a category that is not being serviced right now because of our own limited resources.
And it's got to do something.
Make a move. And so FFG also, just if you haven't been paying attention to the other stuff, has been making moves. They made a move in Netrunner.
I can't believe we don't have one.
They made
yet,
a move with,
honestly.
I know, they made a move with Destiny. They've been making aggressive, organized play moves across the board. They're doing a lot. And so I hope with X-Wing, it is being very measured, very carefully thought out, because there's a lot of people who love this game. And I think there's a lot of people who love this game that aren't playing it right now that would come right back to it with the right adjustments. So we will see.
Adjust.
All right, we always love asking you questions to end the show. I want to know, what's your favorite tabletop gaming peripheral, and why is it your favorite?
That's a good question.
Until next time, keep playing.